really pretty popular author, has like 1.5 million email subscribers to her newsletter. She's developed this quiz that goes along with the newsletter. She talks about the quiz on NPR or wherever she's speaking, and then people always go from there to actually go and take the quiz to find out what the results would be for themselves. This is driving hundreds of thousands of subscribers for us, performing way better than anything else she's done.
Becoming a gaming company is just incredible for retention and engagement. And I think a lot of people are calling the New York Times now a gaming company with a newspaper side hustle.
I'd always sort of also thought these people are idiots for paying 10% of what they make to Substack.
Right.
Everyone is out there going, oh, you can't use Substack because of the 10% fee. And it's like, well, probably don't use Substack because your audience doesn't really belong to you and they're going to push them into using the app instead of giving you the email address, and you don't own the domain and the SEO. The 10% cut is actually it's pretty fair across the board. And unless you rely 100% on paid subscriptions, it's probably a really, really good deal. Tyler, it's been a while. It's been, 4 days, 5 days?
I know, since I got to see you in person at the newsletter conference.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for buying a ticket and coming out and watching me speak. It was lovely to have one of my top fans there.
I actually didn't see you. I had to leave. I had to go pick up my kids, so I left in the afternoon. So I'm actually hoping that we can use this podcast for you to catch me up a little bit.
Well, this podcast, we're aiming for, I think, like a tight 40-45 minutes. And in total on stage, I think I spoke for maybe 4 minutes and 30 seconds-ish. So I think we have time to do that. I was on a 25-minute panel with 3 other people. So, yeah.
I feel like people who have not done panels before, and I'm not one of those people, but or done speaking, you can go so long into a story. Like there were some people who went like 10 minutes of their 20-minute, interview and didn't really get into anything. So I'm hoping you did okay.
No, it was fine. I really like that format of 20 to 30 minute sort of very short Q&A panels. It was really cool to be on there. And to be honest, like the stuff that I was talking about, I've done podcasts and YouTube videos on. Nathan has done courses and stuff on his flywheels. Manny does all sorts of stuff on his growth stuff. You don't need like us to repeat that there in person, right? When there's all those other people that you can talk to. So using that time for questions, I thought was a really good use of it. So they did a great job in my opinion.
So I think today, right, we want to maybe break down the newsletter conference, get into a few takeaways that we had from it. Maybe it was, conversations or, discussions at happy hour, not necessarily what people were talking about on stage. But should we get into that? What do you got? What was, one of your biggest takeaways from the newsletter conference?
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking a lot about this because one of my favorite things about conferences and events like that is just the stuff that happens off the stage, basically. So getting a chance to meet with you and other friends and people from the scene, have a drink, have a coffee, chat about what's really going on. And to be honest, like most of the stuff that people said on the stage, if you listen to podcasts about newsletters or you read newsletters about newsletters, you've probably heard them or someone very similar say basically the exact same thing for free. Right. So that's really not, it's great stuff, but it's not where the extra value is, right? In seeing that live.
I think the biggest value that I get from these things, I was thinking about it on the train ride home while I was missing your chat, was I think it's always like the week after is always the most productive that I have, because I feel so inferior when I go to these things because people are doing such cool stuff. So I think if nothing else, it's a really good motivation. It's like if you're trying to lose weight, maybe you don't have this problem, Louis, but like if you're trying to lose weight and you get on the scale and you actually gain weight, and then you're like that next week, you just go extra hard at the gym, eat so much cleaner. I feel like that's what these things have become to me, is like, again, the stuff that happens on stage is like, you probably know most of that stuff if you're in the game, but just going there and like being surrounded by the energy and the people, like, damn, I suck. I need to up my game. And that's what I think I get the most out of these. So that's why I'm going to keep buying tickets to these, even if I don't get a ton of value out of them otherwise.
I totally get that. I go to a gym where everybody is ridiculously good looking and like looks like they work out all day, every day, and they could be like all fitness trainers. And it definitely gives me that motivation. Like I look at the mirror with disgust and I look at them and I go, come on, who are you? Just become like the second least athletic person here. That's the goal. I don't want to be the most, just the second least. The second worst would be enough. Just don't be the worst. Is my goal. So let's talk about what we saw. And I have three kind of, I guess, none of them are major takeaways, but just three interesting bits that I picked up at the conference that I don't think people necessarily talked about on stage and that we don't talk about a whole lot. Um, and the first one was actually from a lady called Janice Min, who is the founder of The Ankler. And if you haven't seen The Ankler before, it's one of the bigger Substacks. I think they do a couple of $1 million a year in revenue covering the media industry. What I thought was really interesting about her talk was she was actually asked a question about how much of a cut Substack takes from her revenue. Because obviously, Substack famously free if you want to start a newsletter, but they take 10%, right, of everything you make from paid subscriptions. And so they have something like 40 something thousand paid subscriptions every month. So 10% is a pretty big chunk. And one of the conference attendees was asking her, well, like, why do you pay all this money? Isn't this like super expensive? Why don't you move to another platform like a Kit or a Beehive or someone like that? And I thought her answer was actually really interesting because I'd never thought about the cost of Substack before. I'd always sort of also thought these people are idiots for paying 10% of what they make to Substack.
Right.
But if you do the math, right, and you go, okay, well, they're paying 10% of what they earn on paid subscriptions, sure, which is a big number, but they don't have to pay any commission on sponsorships, ads, lead gen, stuff they do outside of the newsletter, sort of premium memberships and stuff. All of that is they keep 100% of that revenue. And so, although it's 10% of paid subscription revenue, in effect, Substack is actually giving them their entire sort of like tech stack, community, podcast hosting, video hosting, email sending, website, deliverability, all that stuff is giving it to them for probably about 2 to 3% of their gross revenue. And then if you go out and look at big publications that run this stuff in house, and you try and figure out, okay, how much are you guys paying for developers, software, all this stuff?
Mhm.
It's not a lot more than 2 or 3%, but it's at least that much, right?
Right.
Probably a little bit more. So just purely on the cost basis, like Substack is actually a pretty amazing deal. I think there's a shit ton of reasons why you wouldn't want to use Substack outside of that. But that argument, I never really thought about before of like how as you grow, actually, it stays being a pretty good deal.
That's it's a fair point. I guess that's yeah. There's plenty of reasons that I wouldn't use Substack, but I suppose that probably isn't one of them. Yeah, I apologize. I didn't really have much to say on this one.
That's all good. I don't think we have to to say anything. I think we like it's just an interesting kind of like fact, right? That everyone is out there going, "Oh, you can't use Substack because of the 10% fee," and it's like, well, probably don't use Substack because your audience doesn't really belong to you, and they're going to push them into using the app instead of giving you the email address, and
Right.
you don't own the domain and the SEO and blah 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 blah. You can't use all these extra features that will help you with growth and revenue and so on and so on. But the 10% cut is actually like it's pretty fair across the board. And unless you rely 100% on paid subscriptions, it's probably a really, really good deal. So, yeah. What was like the biggest thing that stood out to you? What was like your sort of top takeaway from the conference?
Having done just like a half day, I think that the most interesting thing, I think, was a conversation that I had with somebody who had actually reached out to me randomly on LinkedIn. So I talked to them before the conference. And I think that's where a lot of value in these things comes from, is these conversations that you kind of have at lunch.
Yeah.
And
So
so
are you keeping this person? Are they staying anonymous?
they are, because they're building a business. I actually asked him, I think you were sitting with us, and I asked him if we could share this on the podcast. And he said yes, I think. I don't have that in writing, but I'm going to share it anyways. But one of the things we were talking about, and he's like brand new to newsletters. So we were talking about, really, I would call it kind of the 101 type stuff. And so one of the things is they really want to personalize the newsletters. And I won't say what industry they're in, but they want to personalize the newsletter. So we were talking about at sign up what they should be collecting. So I think everybody talks about, the normal stuff. It's like, okay, well, email you have to be collecting. Should you be collecting phone numbers? Should you be getting demographic information? How much money they're making? All this stuff. Like, should you be getting that at sign up? And I think the real answer is it depends, right? There's some cases where you should be collecting more information depending on your newsletter, if it's more of a B2B. But I think if you're going to try to collect information, you probably should be collecting it like at the point of sale, right? And I think we're going to get into this a little bit later, is that you can take advantage of the enthusiasm of the person who's signing up, kind of at that point when they're signing up. But one of the things he kind of mentioned almost in passing that I was like, whoa, time out. We need to talk about that because I think that's really cool. And I kind of want to steal that. Is he said, should we be asking people how they want to get the content? And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, is it how you're going to send it? Are you going to send it via text message or, WhatsApp? He's like, no. I want to ask people what they want to see within the newsletter. And he was thinking, right, like you could have a drop down and say, okay, do you want to get, a very traditional newsletter? So kind of long form. Do you want to just get 10 bullet points? Do you want to have, a kind of a roundup of social media posts? Do you want it to look like a comic strip, right? Do you want it to be all charts and graphics? And I was like, that's a really cool and interesting way to personalize a newsletter. And I think that's something that maybe, 2 years ago would be such a huge pain in the butt to take the same content and break it down into all these different types of formats. But
Yeah,
now
wait,
I
wait.
think
How would you do that?
so. Well, I'm going to get to it, Louis. So let's take the water coolers for example, right? Shameless plug here. So right now I have a very traditional kind of newsletter format. So it's kind of one longer form. We'll call it. But I don't even know what we call it. A post, kind of like a blog, right? At the top, then you have your ad, and then you have maybe a section with shorter posts that are 3-4 sentences long. But what we could do is start sending out the newsletter with maybe it's just 10 bullet points. If somebody just wants short, concise, they're like, Tyler, I don't need your fluff. Like I don't need, your kind of your funny takes and commentary on things. I don't care about that. I just want to know what happened in investing world in the economy. So they get 10 points. Or it could be, a roundup of just the best social media posts, right? For example, if something happens with tariffs, maybe I go and find out, the best takes on social media and I just embed those and somebody gets 5 social media posts every day. Or I go to ChatGPT and I ask it to write a comic strip about what happened and someone gets it that way. So it's almost personalizing the format of the content that's in the newsletter. And it's just something that I never really thought of. And it just makes a ton of sense to me, right? It's kind of the personalizing learning. And I think people talk about that a lot more, right? It's like when you're in grade school, it's like everyone learns the same exact way. And there's, probably a lot of data and a lot of studies that say, hey, not everybody learns the same, right? Some people are visual learners. Some people, are better sitting there listening. Some people are better hands-on. And I think that's the approach that you could take with a newsletter. And I think this is much easier to do now via AI, that, you could go and pull this stuff, and I wouldn't recommend starting with a million different things, but maybe it's something that you can test out. And this is something that I could see myself testing out with the water coolest, right? Especially if people are about to leave. I think it's a cool way to try to get them back in. So maybe they, again, just don't love my commentary, but I say, hey, why don't I just send you a 10 bullet post every day, just so what's going on. The good news is I can still put an ad in there. So I'm curious what you think about this. One, do you think it's an interesting idea, right? And two, do you think that it's doable from a tech perspective?
Oh boy. I love the idea. When I think about this, where my mind goes to is in how you make the newsletter unique, right? How you differentiate from the other newsletters. So I was listening to this and I was thinking, yeah, sure, you can get someone to sign up for your generic, I don't know, the water coolest finance, right? So let's say like your generic finance newsletter,
Right.
and then say, hey, how do you want this finance content to be delivered? But I'm thinking there's maybe even a much bigger opportunity in being like the finance newsletter that is all charts, or the finance newsletter that is presented as a comic. Like you want to go
Mhm.
out and like, I don't think you necessarily want to ask people which format they prefer. I mean, you can as well, but like,
Right.
I think it'd be really interesting to be able to go out and like pitch it as, hey, here is the comic finance newsletter. And behind the scenes, maybe it's the same guy who owns all of them and it's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same content that's being pulled from. But I would have that up front in the ad because you want to hit people who like to read, like to learn visually versus learning in bullet points and stuff. Like hit them where it speaks to them right at the very beginning, that rather than going, oh, this is just another generic finance newsletter. Wait, what? I can do this? That's so cool. So that's where my head goes to in terms of like whether it's possible. I think you maybe you struggle a little bit for consistency. I think it's definitely like everything you mentioned sounds super possible to me though with AI right now. I think probably you end up not really, it's not that you personalize it so much, it's that you generate like the 5 versions of it and then send them. But yeah, you can totally do this with ChatGPT. I actually have a version of Morning Brew that I get sent to my, so I'm gonna be honest with everybody and level real quick. I get about 2,000 newsletters a day into an inbox of mine that I rarely ever look at because it's basically everyone who's signed up. Well, a lot of people who've signed up for Sparkloop that I've been on a call with and like helped them test something, right? So a lot of big newsletters send daily emails, and I've helped them like test that their subscription flow is working or something with Sparkloop,
Mhm.
and I receive the emails. And I still receive them because sometimes it's nice to be able to like dive into that inbox and find an example of something. And so one thing I set up about a year ago is I set up Morning Brew to come to me, but rewritten as, for some weird reason, um, the Scottish groundskeeper from The Simpsons in his
That's
voice.
amazing.
I don't know why I chose him. I couldn't think of anyone else at the time, but I just needed to try something. So in my inbox is like hundreds of emails from Morning Brew, um, as whatever that groundskeeper guy
How
is
are you
called.
doing that?
Just through AI, I send the email to Zapier. Zapier sends the content um, to ChatGPT. It rewrites it for me and sends it back and emails it to me in my inbox. So I miss out on some of the formatting. It doesn't look perfect
Right.
because I'm doing it after the email's been sent. But I mean, it's pretty good. It's an insane thing to do. It's completely useless because he's a completely crazy person. So the
Yeah. I mean,
content is pretty
I,
nonsense, but it works.
I think it brings up a bigger point, and we don't have to get into it now, but I think, right, it's like we're getting into the age of personalization of newsletters. And I think this just brings up the bigger point. It's like you can get it in, whatever voice you want. And I think it's just a matter of time until, someone builds that, that you can totally customize this newsletter, to be, basically your feed for the morning, whatever you want. And it could go, okay, I want to get news on finance at this company, but I also want my MLB team, and I want, news about what's going on in Australia, or like all this random stuff, right? You're going to be able to get that, and that stuff's, kind of already happening, but it's going to get so much better with AI. And to your point, it's like you could put it in the voice of whoever the hell you want to deliver. It's kind of like the what's it like a GPS, right? You can have it like read it in
Yeah.
whatever voice. I think Waze did that, right? You could have like Homer Simpson being, telling you the directions and stuff. I feel like we're going to get to that point very soon if we're not
Where
already
I
there.
where I really want to get to, because you already have like the automated podcast stuff, right?
Yeah,
Where you
yeah.
can turn the newsletter into a podcast. Where I really want us to get to is I want a version that takes the newsletter content and turns it into something that is gonna be optimized for like my attention span and engagement. So what I want is I want the newsletter content taken and I want it turned into a video. I want the video to be in the style of oh, it's not margin call. What's the other one? The other, you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, the Big
Um,
Short.
The Big Short. You know where what's her name? I'm
I
blanking.
know exactly what you're saying. You just want Margot Robbie to be
I want
reading.
Margot Robbie to be in the
Yeah, yeah.
bath, reading it, explaining it to me like I'm an idiot, while one of those little iPhone games plays at the bottom.
Yes, yes. I love those on
Yeah,
TikTok when you're watching some
yeah,
like Warren Buffett, speak, and then it's just like an iPhone game. Yeah.
yeah. That's exactly what I want. I want Margot Robbie and the little iPhone surfer TikTok game
Yeah, a
playing,
little
so that
Temple
I will
Run.
actually watch the 2 minutes. Yeah.
That's another good idea. Just have a in your newsletter have like Temple Run, like a little screen just moving with you, where you can be watching that the entire time. It'll get Gen Z to read newsletters.
But I do think I always wanted someone. Maybe we'll talk about this. Actually, I think it comes up in the Q&A episode. Um, but one of the things where I think this could work really well is as a kind of crazy referral reward idea or a perk for a paid newsletter. Like if you pay for this, yes, A, we'll remove ads, but B, we will we will tweak something, right? Like we'll either change the text to be written in a funny way, or obviously you can turn it off yourself, or
Yep.
we'll include some like weird images that are generated or something like that, where it's just kind of like a weird, quirky thing that people like and is funny and they can share. I think that's that kind of like fun reward is super underrated.
I agree. I love it's something I've been meaning to bring back and I just haven't. But people love that random stuff. Like the number of people who brought up the fact that I have a picture of myself and my family and kind of like a funny saying at the bottom. I basically use the not financial advice, but I make it kind of funny disclosure at the bottom. And like multiple people brought that up to me at the newsletter conference. But one of the things I got rid of is I used to have a bailout button, and I don't know if you guys saw this during March Madness, but they used to have this on. So basically, you could watch on like NCAA.com. You're watching the basketball games at work, but then there was a button that you could hit. It was like the boss button, and then it would pop up and look like a spreadsheet, so you didn't get in trouble. And I put that in the newsletter. Not that it really mattered, right? You could be reading a newsletter, but I had like kind of put those randomly throughout the newsletter, like back in the day, and people absolutely loved this like bailout button idea. And I feel like little things like that are so important for people to kind of remember you and to be, just stand out a little bit these days.
I love that. You know what you should do for the you don't have a paid tier of the newsletter, right?
No, no.
No. But as a referral reward, I guess it's less fun if you tell people it's going to happen. But you should do something for like top subscribers or something like that, where if they open a certain amount or if they had hit a certain streak, you should replace the image of you and your family, like replace one of their faces with the person's face. Like grab the avatar, and you could do that
Yeah.
with ChatGPT. That would be hilarious. Like they would like just see how long it takes them to realize when they scroll to the bottom that they are your 3-year-old or your 5-year-old or whatever.
Yeah. I did start messing around with after like again on the train ride home as people because a bunch again like 3 or 4 people mentioned it to me. I was like, oh, I need to start changing those images at the bottom. So of course with the new ChatGPT image generator, right? Like I started taking pictures of Warren Buffett mentioned that he was going to be stepping down, right? So I had a picture of like me and Warren Buffett at a table, me kind of explaining to him that he should step down and stuff. So I think, you could have a lot of fun with those things. But I think that stuff is super important to build like a truly good, newsletter and like have it stand out, which actually leads me to one of the things on here. I'm just going to jump to it because I thought it was super interesting that you put what the benefits of a quiz. I think that's another one of those things that can help your newsletter just like be different, get people engaged, not just for reading content. So you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge amount to say on it. I never thought about it too much before. But I think we were both at I don't know if this was the mastermind that you were at the day before as well. Because I
Yeah,
did too,
my
and I think
first
one
ever
of them you
mastermind. I didn't know what to expect. Like I thought people were going to come with like cloaks and like holding candles and stuff, but it was much more chill. It was fun.
yeah, when we realized that you didn't have your cloak with you, we took ours off to make sure you didn't feel
Yes, I
bad.
appreciate that. Yeah,
Um, yeah, but it was really fun. Actually, shout out to Summer for giving us the room in the Hearst building, which was this amazing view over Central Park in New York. It
Yeah,
was
if you want to feel inadequate as a as a publisher, as a newsletter publisher, walk into the Hearst building and you're like, oh wow, the waterfall in the lobby. It's like, yeah, they're doing okay. There's a
it was
big
pretty
future for
crazy.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. So what stood out to me there on that topic of quizzes is we were both sitting there and there was an author, a really pretty popular author, has like a million and a half email subscribers to her newsletter.
Mhm.
And we were kind of talking about obviously she gets a lot more sort of um, what you'd call earned media exposure than I think most of us do,
Yeah.
right? So she'll be on podcasts all the time. She will be given shout outs on like radio and even on some TV shows and things like that. And so we were kind of asking, hey, like, is that how you grew your newsletter? Do you sort of plug the newsletter when you do this and get people to sign up? And what I thought was really interesting is she said, you know what? I have kind of mentioned the newsletter when I'm on wherever it is, right? On NPR or whatever. But when I do that, people don't really A, they don't really go and sign up for the newsletter. And
Right.
B, like people don't ever really plug the newsletter on my behalf. Like they're very happy to like take my ideas, say thank you to me for those ideas that I share in the book and then talk about them. But they never like give me credit in the sense of sending people to go and read my newsletter.
Mhm.
But what does work for her is the quiz. So she's developed this quiz that goes along with the book and goes along with the newsletter. And people talk about the quiz. She talks about the quiz on NPR or wherever she's speaking, and then people always go from there to actually go and take the quiz to find out what the results would be for themselves. Right? It's not something
Right.
that someone else can tell you. They actually have to take that exact quiz. So they go through. They have to put their email address in to get the results. And this is driving hundreds of thousands of subscribers for us, performing way better than anything else she's done. And it got me kind of thinking, like, well, yes, duh, this is like super obvious. Everyone should do this. And then like what would that be for me or for you? So I don't know if you what would like the water coolest quiz be to get people excited?
I think it's a super interesting idea. I think you could do something like almost like because of like the voice that we have, right? It could be almost like BuzzFeedy, right? Like, what type of investor are you? Like, are you more like Bill Ackman? Are you more like Warren Buffett? Are you more like a Wall Street bets trader? I think something like that is really cool. The one thing that's getting me excited about quizzes right now is kind of to our last point is more on the engagement side though. Something that and I think this is kind of, we'll call it like the New York Times effect, right? Because I think everybody is realizing becoming a gaming company is just incredible for retention and engagement. And I think a lot of people like are calling the New York Times now, right? It's like a gaming company with a newspaper side hustle. And we even see LinkedIn is literally putting games out now. I don't know if you've ever tried any of those games.
I have not, but my life's goal is to meet somebody who like I want to see someone in the subway playing a LinkedIn game. That's my dream is to see someone do it. I don't
Yeah,
care.
see,
I don't want to see someone reading my newsletter or listening to my podcast. I just want to meet someone who's like hardcore playing a LinkedIn
I
game.
could see you out there like Bear Grylls, being like, "Oh, we see somebody in the wild playing a LinkedIn game." It's
I will go and give them kudos on LinkedIn. I will give them what's that thing where you sort of acknowledge them for their skills. I will give them that for that game.
endorsing them. I was going to say
Endorsing,
poking, but I
exactly.
think that's Facebook, which by the way that still exists. I think it's incredible for engagement, and actually one of the things that I noticed is that Bloomberg recently launched this thing called Pointed, and it's basically like a news quiz, and something that I've been thinking about a lot about putting into to my newsletter. But it's pretty cool. What they did is they gamified the game a little bit, right? So you can actually like leverage up on answers or like bet more points, right? So basically, they're trying to play off the fact that Bloomberg readers are kind of risk takers, investors, stuff like that. And so they put a little bit of money into this. I probably wouldn't be able to do that, but I could probably use, Beehive's built-in functionality to do, the quizzes. And again, I think it's something that you could do pretty easily. Just asking people about, what's happened in the past week, giving away prizes. I was thinking I actually looked into it. I don't think you can actually give away Robinhood gift cards, which I thought would be cool. So I think I'm going to make it up and just be like, yeah, I'm going to, give away a stock or something like that. And I'll just send you the cash for, for whatever it is. Um, and the reason that I'm so excited about this and bullish about it is because I used to ask a question in the newsletter every day, just kind of like a random, I don't know, like something related to, to what was going on. Like, do you like this stock, or, where do you think the S&P 500 is going to close at the end of the year? And then I kind of switched to these like hypothetical questions. Right. So like I started out and they were more related to, business. Like, what would you do in this situation? And then I just went full bar questions. Right. So now it's basically like the one that was going super viral was the, one gorilla versus 100 men who would win. And it just got crazy engagement. And I don't even mean the amount of votes that people gave. I mean, paragraphs that people are writing on these things, thinking through this. So they're probably spending more time writing that than they're spending in the morning, reading my newsletter, which is absolutely incredible. So it got me thinking, like, I think there's a huge opportunity to, if I start giving away prizes and start doing a news quiz, not only, does it get people engaged when they're actually taking part in it, but then it actually, I want to say forces, but reinforces people reading the newsletter every day because they don't want to miss out on something potentially. So I think there's a big opportunity there. I think we might have talked about it before, but there's a couple of these, I guess, kind of trivia or poll newsletters that are almost spin-offs. And I think it's a great idea. Like, if the functionality exists, like, why not use it? And I think that the bigger picture of newsletters, it's going to just become more important to have your audience be super engaged. And I think this is just another fairly low lift way to do that.
Yeah, I like it. There's always a part of me that's like, hey, if people are just opening the newsletter to do the quiz, like, why am I bothering like writing the rest? And then there's also kind of like I have this theory that people are going to click on, probably like most people are only going to click on one link in your newsletter. And especially if you're an ad supported newsletter, do you want that link to be the quiz or the poll?
That's
Or
that's the key, that we start using that, right? We can use that as a sponsored post.
mm-hmm,
Right. So start
that's
having a
smart.
sponsor. If it's the most engaged section of the newsletter, just start having people engage that. And that was actually one big thing. Sorry, now I'm going on a rant here. This is one big thing that I felt maybe a shift from the newsletter conference, is that the kind of the old style of newsletters might be dying. And I think we can do a full episode on this. And so, I mean, the very traditional skim morning brew, right? Like, morning brew and the skim basically pioneered the, native placement newsletter ad, right? It was like the logo at top, about a third of the way down, you have like your native placement. Maybe you have some secondary ads. It feels like there's kind of a shift away from that because I think people are just getting so used to skimming past those parts, and they're like, we get it. We know exactly where your ad is going to be. And so a few people I've talked to are trying some different things. And I think this is one of them that could work. Is like, why not have people interact with your ad at the most engaged part? And I think you could either just have it, the weekly poll or whatever sponsored by the person or sponsored by the ad sponsor, or you could have something where it's like clicking out and going to a landing page, right? Like, that's where they're taking the action, or writing the additional analysis, and you could have people go there, and then it just the ad is plastered all over that, or there's some sort of cool integration if you're doing something more long term. But it just feels like, between AI and between some fatigue, it feels like the look of a newsletter is going to be shifting.
I absolutely love that idea. I was just thinking before about how, like, if you can do that right, you send people, they click through, they go to like a landing page, they have these 5-6 questions you ask them.
Mhm.
The bottom, each time you answer, the page essentially changes, which means you get 5 or 6 good ad slots that you can show that person. you are very likely, if you have a high value audience, going to be making a lot more money from AdSense or whatever you put on there than you
Right.
would from whatever you're doing inside of the ad. So I absolutely love that, because that actually takes us back to my second sort of like big takeaway from the conference, which was that, kind of like you're saying, um, in email, sponsorship and ads especially is kind of struggling at the moment. And there was this huge consensus. Like, I remember last year at the newsletter conference, people standing up and saying, "Oh, these ESPs with their inbuilt ad networks, like this is the future. We're going to be able to write and do, we won't have
Right.
to sell ads. This is all going to happen for us." And there were multiple people who stood up on stage on that day and literally word for word said, "Do not rely on these ad networks to monetize your business. At
Yeah.
the very best case scenario, they are going to make you back the money you spend on using those platforms in the first place, the subscription fee. And if you want to build a profitable newsletter business, you absolutely have to be monetizing in a smart way directly, selling
Mhm.
sponsorships yourself, whatever, but not relying on those networks. They are essentially doomed to fail." And I think there's a real shift that we've sort of we're happy to say that publicly now. This isn't something that people are just sort of quietly saying behind closed doors and going, "Lol,
Right.
this is bad." People are actually talking about this publicly, and so I think that's a really big shift. And I don't know, I think you use ad networks, right, in your own newsletter, or you have in the past.
I do use some of them. So like I tap into the Beehive ad network when it serves me decent ads, but I guess I basically use that as backfill, right? Because that's mostly they're doing some CPM stuff now, but like most of it is CPC, right? So it's like it's tough to make a living off of that. But most of my stuff is direct sales, whether it's through me or working with agencies. Most of it is outsourced at this point to agencies, which I'd recommend, working with them if you're kind of a more of a one man show. But even that, right? It's like, I have 100,000 subscribers, and it's still hard to make quote unquote kind of a living off of that type of money. So I think, it just goes back to like you have to be a lot more scrappy in 2025 on newsletters. And I think a lot of people were saying that. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the newsletter for me was like, yeah, you cannot have just an ad driven newsletter. Like you can't just build the morning brew of X anymore. And we're probably going to beat this into your head in this podcast. But if you're just getting into the game and that's your thought process that you're going to make money off of that, you're just not going to have a good time, right? Like it's not going to be fun, and you're just never going to get to that point. Like you're either going to have to raise some money or just put a shit ton of your own capital in to get to the 200,000-300,000 mark to actually be a player and then make enough money off of ads. But in the meantime, it's just, I think it's so much harder right now. It's almost impossible to kind of bootstrap, a newsletter to the point where you can make enough money off of it, just from ads.
And come in with like a huge audience elsewhere or something like that. It's
Yes.
very tough. And I really respect, like, Ryan Heafy was one of the guys who stood up and said this from 6 a.m. City, who we
Mhm.
should really get him on here to share his thoughts, because
Yeah,
he has a lot of spicy takes and he does not hold back, which I
I
love.
know.
I really respect him sort of standing up there in a room full of like 400 people, a lot of people working at these ad networks in the room, and going, "Come on, guys, this is bullshit. Like, let's be real. You've got to go out there. You've got to hustle. You've got to sell your own sponsorships and find smart ways to monetize, because you are going to be in a very bad place very soon if you don't do that."
I agree. One of the points you brought up, we should run the math on this, but this is something I've been thinking about. Instead of actually sending people okay, so still sending newsletters. Maybe it's not, I guess you can't even call it a newsletter. It's more of an email, but basically sending an email to people with a link and saying, go to this site to access my content, right? So like, it's a very strong call to action, but it's basically like a one liner. So think about the water coolers. It's just the top section. It says, "Hey there, weekday warrior, go check out your newsletter today," sends you to a link. I'm actually curious if you could make more money off of like Google ads and programmatic at this point versus actually selling newsletter ads. And right, you have to take
100%.
and you have to take into account how much easier your life would be, right? It's like you turn that on and you totally it's a set it and forget it kind of situation. The problem is, right, like how many people are actually going to click through? You're putting like a huge hurdle in front of people to go into their email, click on that, and then go read your website. But I don't know. There's definitely some math worth mathing that it may make sense to switch to that or at least test it out for some
Which
people.
is that is so funny because absolutely, like we were talking about this, I think, a while back, maybe off camera, and this is one of the things that I've been saying, like, is definitely going to happen this year. Is we're essentially reverting to how sort of 10, 15 years ago, like magazine publishers would treat their newsletter, which is, hey, we have all this content on site, we make a shit ton of money off the ads and everything that we have on those pages.
Yep.
So our newsletter is essentially just a source of traffic back to the site for us to make money off people recurring visits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, the way they do it slightly differently. They will have like 5 hooks, 5 bullet points in the email, right, with maybe an image, and it's essentially just enough to get you interested in one of those 5 things, and then they hope that you'll stick on the site and browse around. But absolutely, I can see more and more people going back to doing that. I mean, there's no downside to putting an ad in that newsletter as well. Like,
Right, right.
yeah, why not?
It could
But yeah,
basically be, you
definitely.
could call it as a dedicated ad, right? You could be like, listen, there's nothing else in this email, right? It's just a dedicated ad. Maybe that's worth a test on the water coolers. Obviously, you risk kind of pissing people off, but I'm curious like what a click through rate would be on that big bold link that says like go to the watercoolest.com versus read this all in an email, right? Because the incentives are all pointing towards performance, right? And it's so hard to get performance when you provide all the value is in the inbox. So it's this battle that we're constantly fighting.
Yeah. Talking of battles we're constantly fighting, I think you had one more point, right? Which was, I think, based on Adam Ryan's beginning
Yes.
talk.
Yes, he got all of us, pretty good. He did like the TEDx, right? You put two charts next to each other, and one seems really obvious, like the right answer. He was like, which business would you rather have? So I'm probably going to screw this up. Hopefully, we can actually find his slides. Maybe we can email him about them. But basically, it was showing, churn in your newsletter of a cohort. And one of them, and I think it was over 12 months, right? So the chart on the left basically showed there was a big fall off in the first month, and then it slowly kind of goes down, right? And then the other chart shows pretty steady churn, over the 12 months. And his question was, which one would you rather have? A lot of people said, well, the steady churn over the 12 months.
Just because the average churn for both of those newsletters over the 12 months was like 5% or something, right? The average monthly churn was 5%,
Yep.
but the first newsletter had like all of that churn in the first 2 or 3 months and then almost nothing for the rest. And the second newsletter was sort of, first month was maybe 3%, second month 8%, 3, 10, 2, 15, so on, right? Like just,
Yeah.
it kept on month over month,
Yeah.
essentially.
Thank you for being the nerdy guy on the podcast. I'm the content guy. You're the nerd. And so it was super interesting, right? Because everyone said, okay, well, it's definitely the one on the right with the, kind of steady. But he brought up a really good point, right? Is that you want the one on the left because you're going to lose a bunch of people in the first month, but you want the long tail of those like really sticky people who become fans. And I think it brings up a really good point that you almost like want your newsletter to not be for everyone, right? Because if you're just trying to be for kind of everyone, you don't want to be in that in between where it's like, I can live with this newsletter or I can live without it. So you just kind of have this steady decline of people who just like, they're like, this doesn't really help me. After 3 or 4 months, they get rid of it. It's like you want to get rid of some of those people in the first month, and then all those other people are absolutely obsessed with your content. And so it really kind of stuck out to me that, you think churn, at the beginning is bad, but it's actually a really good thing. And it means that I think he kept using the word content market fit, which I thought was really cool. Is you want to make sure that you're keeping all those people who are going to just become obsessed and your super fans, and they're going to, buy your products and they're going to click on your ads. And I think it's going further. I talked about this, with a couple people. Is like, and I think people think about podcasts like this, but maybe not as much with newsletters. Is like, it's so important right now to, you should have done it yesterday, but getting into people's rotation, right? So it's like, what kind of capacity do people have for newsletters, and what do they have for podcasts? You assume it's like 3, 4, 5 are kind of on your roster, and you want to be in that 3, 4, 5 newsletters that are in people's starting lineup. And I think the newsletter that has relatively high churn and then stickiness, over the next 12 to 24 months, versus the one who's just kind of losing people, constantly. And not to mention, right, the math of trying to replace those people constantly is less than ideal.
Yeah, I mean, I have thoughts on this. So I think of the three, so Adam shared, I think, three different metrics that he cares about.
Yep.
There was, it was interesting. Nobody noticed at the time, I don't think, but the math was wrong on the first one. Like the numbers were impossible.
Was that the click through rate?
No, so the click through rate one is who knows, right? Like,
Yeah,
you
that
want to
was
stand up on stage and say these are the numbers.
yeah,
Great, go for it. I have no problem with that.
yeah, that was the ad click through rate, right? So I think he said it was like, if you have a consumer newsletter, it should be 1.5%, and B2B should be 0.75% or something, which I think is like, yeah, I don't know. Those numbers are very depend on a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, you see some people say that's lower than they thought. Like, they're seeing, some people have said it's higher. Some people have said it's about right. I think, PK, we went up there. He shared three numbers. Getting one of those three metrics on point seems fair, seems good.
Yeah.
I'll give him that one. The first one, the numbers were wrong.
What was the
He was
first one? I
talking about,
forget.
the first one was about how, which he actually made a really, really good point, which is that, like, one way to see how good your content market fit is to look at essentially how much people are reopening and sharing your newsletter, like forwarding it onto friends,
Mm.
which gives you an idea of how popular it was, right? It's an early indicator
Yep.
of how popular that edition will be. So what he was looking at is like the total impressions, so or total opens, right? So let's say 1,000 people open it, or the newsletter has 1,000 opens in total,
Yep.
and that is a ratio of unique opens. So he's saying, okay, if this newsletter gets 1,000 opens in total, but only 500 unique opens, that means that on average, everybody is either sharing with one friend or they're reopening it, right? They're opening it twice, basically, because they like it so much, they decide to go back in and take another
Mhm.
look. And like that basic idea, I think he was super spot on with, and it is a really interesting way to look at it. I bet it worked really well at the Hustle in 2017, 18, 19. Doesn't really work as well anymore because Apple MPP is going to be opening 20,
Yeah.
30, 40%. And then when a human opens it, most of those re-register as a second open.
Yep.
So what was good, like, if you are good by 2018 standards today, you're probably very bad because a lot of that is completely inflated.
Yeah, I
But
think there were a
my
lot
main
of
point was
people
just,
who probably left feeling really good about themselves. Like, look how
yeah.
many
Well,
opens I
well, I
get.
mean, I think they were left feeling very confused when they actually start to think about it, because the numbers he was sharing on the screen are mathematically impossible. Those ratios, I think he reversed them by accident, or I don't know if he got confused or what. But I was talking to like Nathan May, a friend of mine, and a couple of other guys about this, and being like, hey, like, I'm happy to, like, let's go into this assuming that I'm like misunderstanding something really simple, but there's no way these numbers like back out. Um, so I would say, like, take the idea from it, really good. Don't worry too much if you do see the slide and the actual numbers he shared, which I can't remember them off the top of my head. Like, there was a mistake there somewhere. I don't know. Like, maybe we can even have him on at some point to be like, yeah, okay, sorry, yeah, I reversed, like, I divided instead of times or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's what it was actually supposed to be. It's easy to happen, right, when you're preparing some slides before an event. But just on the churn thing, I thought, like, I was looking at that, I was like, okay, I totally get why why you feel this, like why you think this about churn, right? Why you view it this way, and why Adam would, having been at the hustle,
Mhm.
where you have a daily habit forming newsletter, and really what you care about is what we think about in software is like Adam was talking about it as just retention. We in most places like subscription companies, you don't think of it as just retention. You split those two up. You split it into activation and retention. So um, if you get a new subscriber and they never really open and engage with your content, they can't churn. They can't leave because they were never there in the first place.
Yep.
Basically, right? So we split that up. Normally, you'd think about it, and the way I think about it with newsletters is, hey, in the first month, what percentage of new subscribers have actually even activated, and then of those ones, then okay, well, who goes on to be retained, or who churns and who leaves. Um, and I think with a habit forming newsletter like the Hustle, like the Water Coolest, makes a ton of sense to me why you would really, really care about that, and why you would hope that it would be, you know, big churn in the first month while
Yep.
sort of people are figuring out if it's for them or not. You're being very aggressive at helping them figure that out. And then less and less and less over time. But I know plenty of really, really good newsletters that are super successful and have sort of churn charts that look absolutely nothing like that at all. Um, and most of those, the common thread is that they tend not to be habit forming newsletters.
Got it.
So, for example, I used to run a newsletter teaching people how to do sales from scratch. If you were still on my newsletter after about 6 or 7 months, I've kind of failed you. And like either way,
Right.
you're going to leave, right? You've either got what you need or you didn't get what you need and you don't, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
either way, like a year after subscribing to my newsletter, I would hope that I would have almost 100% unsubscription rate. And guess what? That newsletter, I had a 40 something dollar lifetime value per subscriber, like way
Mhm.
higher than the Hustle or something like that has. So it's just as good a business on a per subscriber basis. It's doing a slightly different job, right? So
Yep.
I
Yeah. So that was almost like
yeah.
an email course, right? So
Well, I mean, it's a newsletter. It's just a newsletter that's for a specific phase of your life. Same as, like, if I write a newsletter for people who are studying in San Francisco, like, after 3 years, you should probably have left ish, roughly, right? Um,
yeah.
things like that. Like, there's all kinds of situations where your churn chart won't look like that, and it's perfectly fine. So I love that he shared those things because it's really good to think about,
Yep.
but I wouldn't be too worried if you don't look that way. I would just take it as like, oh, this is an interesting thing to think about. Like, I should go look at those numbers and see if what I have makes sense for the kind of
Yeah.
newsletter that I run.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Obviously, I'm super selfish. So it mattered to me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's good. It's like when you see data that like backs up what you have to say. You're like, yeah, that's a great data point. Let me pull that out. But I think that's a good point for anyone who's probably like earlier on their journey in newsletters. Is that I think newsletters is like such this huge broad term, right? And it like almost bleeds into email, right? Or it does bleed into email. Is that like I think everyone there's so many good points at the conference, but there were so many different types of people up there and types of newsletters, right? There's like B2B and commerce and niche and broad. And I think you need to really consider like what newsletter you're trying to create or what business you're trying to create and like kind of cherry pick those things. So yeah, I think it's even like some of the conversations we have here, we should probably, it's a good point. We should probably be better about calling that out and be like, yeah, in the B2B space, this makes sense. Like in the consumer space, this makes sense. And I think I tend to, certainly lean, water coolest. So, kind of consumer facing, more broad type of newsletters. But yeah, you always got to consider kind of where people are coming from and what they're incentivized to be pushing you.
Yeah. Did you go back and check if the water coolest had a retention graph that looked like Adam's sort of like good example, quote unquote?
No, I didn't because I'm too scared. Right? I wonder if it's not, and then I'm gonna seem like a schmuck. I mean, I think it will. Just because of like, I think that it also helps, right? Because for something like this, we are right, like we're out there buying, right? Not buying, but like, running ads and getting a bunch of subscribers in. So it's like you think about it like the Hustle or Morning Brew. It's like they are just adding tens of thousands of subscribers a day. So just by the fact of the sheer numbers, there's going to be a lot of people that churn. And then to your point, it's like your sales newsletter. I don't know if you were running ads for it or not, but it was probably a bit more of an organic, and more structured, right? If you were posting on Reddit or on LinkedIn about it, it's like those are people who actually already care about that thing, right? Versus like, a hustle ad. Like you might just kind of, it might pique your curiosity. You might, sign up by mistake, that sort of thing. So again, it's just like you're just playing basically a different game. But no, I haven't looked yet because I don't want to get the bad news.
Okay, we can find a time to do that. Maybe that can be like I don't know if we get to what should we do? Like the 10th episode, we can go in and just rip your heart out and crush your dreams and
Yeah, just like
make it
shred,
look good.
shred. We do the roast. We should do that. The roast of the newsletters. I think I will say though, I hate. Sorry if anyone listening is doing this. I know a lot of you guys are, but like, I'm not a fan of the build in public. Maybe I was born in a different age where it's like we don't talk about money and politics and stuff. Not that I'm that old, but
So it's the guy writing a finance newsletter from his basement.
yeah. But I'm not a fan of that game. So we won't be doing that on this podcast, at least for my newsletter.
Okay, well, I don't mind sharing stuff. I just don't think it's super relevant for most people. Like, I don't do the build in public as like a
You're
like
the only
building in
one. You're
public.
the only one doing Spark Loop, right? It's like there's not a lot of other people.
Well, exactly. Building in public attracts people who are trying to do something like you. So in my case, would
Right.
be people who are trying to build software companies or something like that. Doesn't attract like people who run media businesses and big newsletters. They don't care what like I'm doing at Sparkloop like day to day.
Yeah.
Like it's not relevant for them. Like I should talk about the interesting stuff that I hear about from other newsletter operators, not that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It'd actually
I
be
don't have that.
it'd actually be an incredibly good idea for me to do it from a consulting perspective, right? To be like, hey, look, this is what I'm doing, in my newsletter. But I think it goes back to the point of like everyone's is so different, right? Like even if you're building something similar to, the water coolest, there's going to be just like a lot of little nuance. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure some of it will be helpful, but like I need all the context of your newsletter, before I, start giving you recommendations on things.
Definitely. And talking about giving people recommendations of things, we are going to jump over to the Q&A episode now, which we've decided we're going to start doing until further notice.
Yeah.
So
Until you
if
guys
you
stop
have
listening.
the 5 of you out there, until you stop listening, please send in your questions. If you have one for myself, Tyler, or the both of us, Tyler, what's the email address?
It is letterlandpod@gmail.com.
Okay, so send those in. We prefer videos or voicemails or anything like that we then don't have to read out ourselves. So if you'd like to be famous to a very, 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 very niche small corner of the internet, please send those in. Otherwise, just text is fine. We get it. You're a newsletter person. You have a face for the radio and a voice for the text. It's no problem. Let's jump over.
Sounds good.
See you there.